Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about covering letters because I think covering letters are a very important tool for you in terms of applying for jobs and also standing out from the competition. So we talked about before that with a CV and tailoring a CV that probably about 90% of people in the marketplace do not tailor their CV to that individual role. So we've discussed how you being part of the 10% can make you stand out from the crowd. And I think the same goes for covering letters. I think covering letters traditionally were something that were mandatory for people if you go back maybe 10, 15 years ago. And what's happened now with the advent of job websites and job boards is that they don't insist on a covering letter. So for a number of different reasons, people have stopped providing them. And I think a couple of those reasons are, number one, people don't really know what to say in a covering letter, and they're not sure what to put that's different from a CV. And I think number two is that, as we all know, if we're applying for jobs and there are mandatory fields, then we tend to complete the mandatory fields. If there are then fields that are optional, we kind of take the path of least resistance. Human nature, I guess, but it's certainly, when it comes to applying for jobs, not the right thing to do. So you will see when you go on websites like Indeed, they allow you the opportunity to add on covering letters, but they put the magic word in brackets, and that magic word is optional. So what we do is we think we won't do that, and I think that's a grave mistake. Because from my research and talking to employers and job websites, it seems that on average, when you're looking at applications, about 5% of people in this market are including a covering letter. Now, again, if you transfer yourself into the mind of the employer or the poor soul that's got the task of reading through maybe 200, 300, 400 applications for one job, they want things that are going to be easy for them. And if they're looking at a long list of applications that have been made for their job, and they notice out of the 100 people that have applied that 5 of those people have attached a covering letter, then I would suggest, and you can answer that yourself, but I know certainly I would be inclined to look at those applications first that have submitted a covering letter, because they're telling me, one, they've done something different, and also two, that they've made an effort. Yeah, and rather than just scrolling through a load of CVs that look the same, I would be much more inclined to focus my attention on those applications where people have made an effort. And again, you can decide in your own minds whether that would be the case for you or not. But I think generally, if you looked at it and thought, right, if I'm looking for maybe 5 candidates to put through to interview or to bring in to see face to face, then do I really want to be looking through 100, 200 applicants? Probably not. So what I would do is look for anything that had a point of difference. And I think by producing a covering letter, I really think you can make your application stand out and make sure that when they're looking at the list of applicants, they notice you, because you have suggested, A, you've got something to say, and B, you have made an effort to do a covering letter. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword, and what I mean by that is that there's a huge benefit of attaching a covering letter, but also there is a risk. And that risk is if an employer is presented with a CV and a covering letter, they would generally read the covering letter first. So if your covering letter is not up to standard, or is simply replicating what is on your CV anyway, then there is a risk that if the covering letter is too long, it's boring, it doesn't cover the right things, then they may well be inclined to not read your CV. So there is a small risk. But I think it's a risk that's worth taking, because I think if you can do anything in this marketplace to stand out from the crowd and to make your application jump out at the employer, then I think you should do it. And we've already touched on many different ways in which you can do that, and the covering letter is certainly one of the most powerful ones. So therefore, it's important for us to look at what goes in a covering letter, because if we simply just replicate what's in our CV, then we are missing an opportunity. So for me, a covering letter needs to do 3 things. Of course, there is the initial interaction, initial introduction to the covering letter, where you may well feel the need to talk about the role you're applying for. I would say if you're applying for a job on any website like Indeed, then you do not need to specify which job you are applying for, because your application will be logged against that particular vacancy. If you are writing to someone off spec, if you are doing a proactive application, then of course you would need to do the introduction where you talk about the role that you're applying for. But generally that's not going to be needed. So what that allows us to do is get straight into the good stuff. And for me there, as I said, there are three different parts. And I think number one is by far the most important part. And the biggest mistake that I see people make is that they start straight away in the covering letter talking about themselves. And I think that is duplication on what is on the CV, because the CV is talking about you and talking about the skills you have. So I think it's very important that the start of the covering letter talks about them and not you. So I would suggest the first thing that goes in a covering letter, and the most important thing in a covering letter, is something that we can't do in a CV. And that is actually answering the question, why do we want to work for them? So for me, that paragraph needs to include research that you've done on the business. So researching the company before you apply, not waiting to the night before the interview, and making sure that you are finding reasons either on the company website, on their social media pages, on their job description that they've posted up on the website, finding reasons for why you want to work for that business. And I think that's very important. It's also a way of buttering them up, to coin a phrase, in terms of saying, look, we think your company are really good. We like what you do. We like the different things that you do. And therefore, I want to be part of that. That's easier, obviously, if a company is growing or if a company is doing exciting new products. And it can be difficult if a company is not in that marketplace and not following that. But I think even if we don't have a lot of information from the job description, or the company aren't particularly inspiring, we can still find things and reasons as to why they purport to be different on what they do. And this is the opportunity in that covering letter, in the first paragraph, to talk about them. So the template that I will provide to you has this set out so that you can simply fill in the missing gaps in terms of the information you've found out. So research, probably 10, 15 minutes research into the business is key for this stage, so you can highlight the reasons why you want to work for them. That is the biggest fail that I see in covering letters that I get sent every day, that people just talk about themselves and don't address what attracted them to the company. So I think that is very, very important. So the first paragraph would generally contain 2 or 3 reasons as to why you want to work for that company. It may be that you are a customer of theirs and you've experienced their service before. It may be that you like the innovative products that they are developing. You like their environmental policy or their community policy or charities they support, or it may be something else to do with them that makes them different and makes them appear to be an attractive employer. The second paragraph of your covering letter needs to now switch, where you've talked about why them and why you want to work for them. And it now needs to talk about what you can bring to the role. And what I would do here is focus on 3 things. Focus on 3 things that you found in your research, whether it be reading the job description or looking at their company website, and highlight 3 skills that you have that match the job description closely. And I would summarize them in a paragraph type format. And again, with the template that I will provide to you, you will see that you can just insert these words into a pre-loaded sentence, which will make it easy for you to change your covering letter every time you apply. Because that is key. And obviously with the first part of the covering letter being looking at why them, you can no longer have one covering letter and use that covering letter for every application. It's very similar to the CV in terms that you should be tailoring key elements of your CV to that role so that you are matching with their requirements so they can see that quickly. Yeah. So it's the same principle with a covering letter, that you would be changing it every time you apply for a job. I'm not saying, therefore, you need to rewrite the whole thing, because a lot of the paragraphs and some of the reasons may well be the same, but it should be tailored to that specific opportunity. So once you've talked about point number 1, which is why them, the second bit of the covering letter, as I said, is why you or why me. So that's talking about your 3 key skills and how they match to that company and match to the job description. And then the last bit that I would do is look at those 3 key skills and provide a short example about how you've done them or achieved them in the past. So if you're picking up the fact that you are an excellent communicator, talk a little bit over 1-2 lines about where you learned to be a good communicator and how that impacted the customer, the business that you worked in previously. So I would be looking for, generally in bullet point format, 1, maybe 2 lines to look at the 3 key skills that you've identified and give some sort of example or achievement that backs up that claim. I think the covering letter is as simple as that. I think it's a 3-part document that talks about why them, why you, and prove it. Give evidence, give examples about how you've done these things in the past. The top and the bottom of the covering letter are going to be standard in terms of the introduction. The bottom is obviously going to be thank you for your attention or something along those lines, which you will see in my template. But I think if you focus on getting these 3 key elements right in the covering letter and start using a covering letter for every application, you will see that your applications get more traction and you get invited for more interviews. The covering letter should never be longer than 1 page, because all the evidence suggests, whereas they spend about 6.7 seconds on an average, so under 10 seconds reading your CV in this market, the evidence suggests that if you take the time to do a covering letter, they will read all of it. But they will not read all of it if it is over a page, and certainly won't read all of it if it's 2 pages. So keep it snappy, keep it to the point, keep it short, and keep it based on the key elements that you found out about that company and why you think you will be a good fit. So I can provide and will provide a template for you to use, but now it's down to you to look at the covering letter template and come up with a covering letter for a job of your choice. And of course, as always, you can send that back to me and I will comment on it and help you to change it so that you have a blueprint to move forward and that in future you can feel much more comfortable when you are using covering letters. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was useful. If you have any questions, please let me know and I will try my best to answer them.